Panic has set in at the Kremlin.
С праздником вас! С Днем Великой Победы! Ура!
Vladimir Putin, a leader who has ruled Russia with absolute power for 25 years, eliminating his rivals and positioning himself as a modern Tsar, is now facing the only reality he cannot control: time. His time is running out. In the darkest corridors of the Kremlin, the question of who will come after Putin echoes. This question found an answer in a document leaked from the Kremlin in recent days. According to the leak, Putin is working on a secret succession plan to ensure that the system he created can survive without him. This plan is not just about choosing a name. It aims to reshape all power mechanisms, loyalty networks, and economic balances. It is precisely at this point that Putin's mention of life extension technologies during his meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in recent months is much more than a personal fantasy. It reveals his deepest fear. The system exists with him, but what happens without him? And now, this fear is taking shape in the corridors of the Kremlin. With the leak of the secret succession plan, the first signs of a power struggle have begun to emerge. Because in Putin's Russia, power is not transferred peacefully or constitutionally. Power is seized. Now the wolves are lying in wait in the shadows of the Kremlin. They are watching for their master's first moment of weakness, their first hesitation. To understand why Putin's succession crisis is so dangerous, one must look at Russia's bloody and chaotic power transfers throughout its history. Russia's political DNA lacks the tradition of rule-bound, peaceful, and predictable power transfers found in Western democracies. Power changes hands not at the ballot box or in the corridors of parliament, but behind closed doors, through ruthless intrigues, purges, and often bloodshed. The Soviet era is replete with the most brutal examples of this tradition. The process that began after Lenin's death was not an internal party election, but a ruthless struggle for survival. Joseph Stalin eliminated rivals like Trotsky not only politically, but also physically, bringing the party and the state under his absolute control. What happened after his death was no different. A group, including horrific figures such as Lavrenti Beria, attempted to seize power. However, Nikita Khrushchev ultimately rose to the top by purging his rivals. Khrushchev himself was overthrown in a palace coup by Leonid Brezhnev. The brief Andropov and Chernenko periods that followed Brezhnev presented a picture of dull stability, with elderly leaders dying in succession and the Politburo selecting a new leader from within its own ranks. But the fundamental dynamic remained the same. Power was determined not by the will of the people, but by the bargaining and power struggles among a narrow elite group. The collapse of the Soviet Union further deepened this chaotic tradition. Gorbachev's reforms created a wave of chaos he could not control, and eventually, Boris Yeltsin effectively seized power by climbing onto a tank and repelling a communist coup. The 1990s were a Wild West period in which Russia as a state nearly disintegrated. Oligarchs plundered the country's wealth, and different families in the Kremlin fought each other. There was one exception to this dark picture: Yeltsin's transfer of power to Vladimir Putin. This was the first and only managed, peaceful succession plan in modern Russian history. However, it was not the rule but the exception. Because this handover was not the selection of an heir to carry on the vision of a strong leader, it was the installation of a relatively unknown former KGB agent to protect the security and wealth of the family of a leader whose health was failing and whose popularity had collapsed. One of Putin's first acts was to sign a decree granting Yeltsin and his family lifelong immunity. This is Putin's biggest dilemma today. He is not a weak leader like Yeltsin. He is the absolute ruler of the system. So how can a man who rules a system as powerful and ruthless as himself trust anyone to whom he might hand over his position? In the game he created, what guarantee does he have that the person he chooses as his successor will not destroy him and his legacy the day he takes power? No one can give that guarantee. That is why Putin cannot repeat Yeltsin's model. And since there is no other peaceful model in Russia's history, the country inevitably faces the risk of returning to that old and bloody tradition, namely, the battle of the wolves within the Kremlin. The question of who will succeed Putin preoccupies the minds of every diplomat, every analyst, and every Kremlin official in Moscow. There is no official list of candidates, but behind closed doors, names put forward by different power centers and factions are being whispered. We can divide these potential successors into three main categories: loyal technocrats, ruthless Siloviki, and princes of the future. Loyal technocrats are capable, get-things-done managers who are absolutely loyal to Putin and have no political ambitions. Their job is to implement Putin's vision and ensure the system's wheels turn smoothly. They can be seen as trustees or regents who will govern the country during a transition period until a consensus is reached among the elites. The most obvious example of this category is Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. A former head of the tax office, Mishustin caught Putin's eye by digitizing Russia's complex tax system and increasing its efficiency. He is an extremely talented technocrat and manager. His greatest advantage is also his greatest disadvantage. He is not a power center in his own right. He has no base within the Siloviki, is not recognized by the public, and lacks political charisma. The elites may consider him a controllable figure, but this also makes him a weak leader who could be overthrown at the first opportunity. Sergei Kiriyenko, deputy head of the presidential administration, is known as the Kremlin's political brain. He is the person who manages Russia's domestic politics, elections, the appointment of governors, and most importantly, the integration of Ukraine's occupied territories. He is intelligent, ruthless, and extremely effective. However, his past is also problematic. In the 1990s, he served as the youngest prime minister during the Yeltsin era and is remembered for liberal reforms. This liberal past makes him unreliable for the hardline wing of the Siloviki. He is not a king, but a kingmaker. He will prefer to remain behind the scenes. The ruthless Siloviki are hawks from the intelligence, military, and security bureaucracy that form the foundation of Putin's power. For them, Russia's power is synonymous with the power of its army and secret services. They harbor a deep distrust and paranoia toward the West. Their rise to power would likely mean a more repressive, more militaristic, and more isolationist Russia. Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev is the patriarch and ideologue of this group. Like Putin, he is a former KGB agent and one of Putin's oldest and most trusted allies. While head of the FSB, he turned the agency into Russia's most feared power. He is known for his anti-Western rhetoric, which borders on conspiracy theories. He is considered Putin's brain and is one of the most ardent defenders of the war against Ukraine. His greatest advantage is his immense influence over the Siloviki and his ideological clarity. His greatest disadvantage is his age and the fact that he is a copy of Putin. The elites may not want another old, hardline KGB agent after Putin. FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov is the head of the Federal Security Service, Russia's most powerful and feared institution. He has files on all political and economic actors in the country, giving him immense leverage. He is a quiet, mysterious, and largely unseen figure. His power comes from the power of his institution. However, the intelligence fiasco at the start of the Ukraine war has damaged the FSB's reputation and somewhat weakened Bortnikov's position. Still, in a moment of chaos, he could be one of the most advantageous figures as the person controlling the nerve center of the state. The princes of the future, on the other hand, are younger figures rising under Putin's direct patronage, groomed as future leaders. They are the new faces who will ensure the system's continuity and perhaps prove their loyalty to Putin. Dmitry Patrushev, Deputy Prime Minister, is the son of Nikolai Patrushev and the most obvious candidate for a dynastic era in modern Russia. He has the full support of his powerful father and has gained state experience in important positions, ranging from agriculture minister to deputy prime minister. His youth and Western-style technocrat image could make him an acceptable compromise candidate for both the Siloviki and the economic elite. The biggest criticism is that he owes his success more to his father's surname than to his own abilities. Being seen as a product of nepotism could prevent him from gaining respect among the ruthless Kremlin wolves. Alexei Dyumin is perhaps the most mysterious and talked-about name. He served for years as Putin's closest bodyguard and aide, becoming his shadow. This means Putin has absolute personal trust in him. He was later appointed to critical positions such as Deputy Defense Minister and head of the GRU and managed the annexation of Crimea. He is currently the governor of Tula, an important industrial and military region. Dyumin is a complete package, respected in both military and intelligence circles, with political experience. Many analysts whisper that if Putin has a secret successor in mind, it could be Dyumin. Considering these potential candidates and the power centers behind them, three main scenarios emerge for post-Putin Russia. Scenario 1. The Tsar's will, that is, a managed and peaceful transition. This is the most optimistic but least likely scenario. In this scenario, Putin, before his health deteriorates or he loses control, names a trusted successor, as Yeltsin did for him. He transfers power through a constitutional process. In return, he secures guarantees of lifelong immunity for himself and his inner circle, and the protection of his legacy. The biggest obstacle to this scenario is Putin's character. He is a leader who does not fully trust anyone and does not like to share power. He knows that the moment he names a successor, he will become a lame duck, and all the elites will rally around the new power, isolating him. Scenario 2 is a palace coup and internal struggle. This is the most likely and most dangerous scenario. Putin suddenly dies without naming a successor, falls victim to an assassination, or his health seriously deteriorates. In this case, a power vacuum forms in the Kremlin. A ruthless power struggle begins between the Siloviki faction led by Patrushev, Technocrats like Mishustin, and perhaps different groups within the army. This struggle is conducted behind closed doors, with arrests, purges, and perhaps political assassinations. Russia enters an extremely unstable and tense period lasting several weeks or months. At the end of this war, the most ruthless, most organized, and most powerful faction, probably a new strongman emerging from within the Siloviki, seizes power. This scenario could drag Russia into an even darker dictatorship. The final scenario is the period of turmoil. This is the worst-case scenario. The Boyars' War in the Kremlin drags on without a winner emerging, completely paralyzing the state's central authority. As different factions destroy each other, the state's control weakens. In this chaotic environment, regional leaders like Ramzan Kadyrov could declare de facto independence with their own armies. Separatist movements in Tatarstan or other ethnic republics in the Caucasus could reignite. Different units of the army could pledge allegiance to different leaders, bringing the country to the brink of civil war. This would mean a massive country with nuclear weapons collapsing inward and becoming a failed state. The consequences of this scenario would be catastrophic not only for Russia, but for the entire world. Ultimately, Vladimir Putin's speeches about immortality actually reveal his greatest tragedy and dilemma. For 25 years, he has worked to rescue Russia from the chaos of the 1990s and build a stable, powerful state. However, in doing so, he created an extremely fragile system that concentrates all power in his own hands, relies on personal loyalty rather than institutions, and has no plan for what will happen after him. He has essentially mortgaged Russia's future to secure his own political immortality. His refusal to designate a successor is not a show of strength, but rather a sign of deep weakness and fear. Because he knows that the day he names an heir, he will also be announcing the beginning of his own end. Therefore, he tries to stay in power by pitting the wolves around him against each other, making everyone dependent on him, and using uncertainty as a tool of governance. However, this strategy only delays the inevitable end. Eventually, time will run out, and when that day comes, the legacy Putin leaves behind will most likely not be the powerful Russian state he claims to have rebuilt, but a country ready to be swallowed up by the power vacuum he himself created. A country sliding into chaos. The Tsar, who has become the greatest prisoner of his own system, may have to face his greatest fear, the flood after him. This panic that began in the Kremlin is only the first sign of the approaching storm. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think this Kremlin power struggle will end? Each of your comments helps us expand the discussion on this topic. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss new videos. See you in the next one.